William Green was a man who believed he had built a perfect life in the heart of London. His wife, Margaret, elegant and soft-spoken, shared his dream of raising their only daughter, Emily, with all the love and comfort the world could offer. From the moment Emily took her first steps inside their beautiful Victorian townhouse in Kensington, William vowed she would never feel the hunger or hardship he had known as a boy growing up in a tiny village. As the years passed, the Greens showered Emily with gifts: dolls from Paris, dresses from Milan, gadgets and ponies, and anything her heart desired. It became their silent way of showing love, replacing evenings spent at home with expensive holidays in Spain or Greece. Emily learned early that tears brought treasures and tantrums brought trips to the shops. Now, on the cusp of her 16th birthday, William wanted to make it unforgettable. He had arranged a surprise party at the elegant Claridge's Hotel. The ballroom was bathed in golden light, a towering cake stood at the center, and a band played Emily's favorite songs. Then, the moment arrived. A red silk cloth was pulled back in a flourish to reveal a brand new Mini Cooper, gleaming under the chandelier's glow. The crowd gasped, phones flashed, and William felt a swell of pride. Surely, Emily would be overjoyed. But as she approached the car, her nose wrinkled in distaste. She barely touched the keys handed to her, her voice slicing through the music. "I wanted something better," she said, loud enough for everyone to hear. Her gaze swept the room, settling coldly on her father. "I wanted your car, Dad. Not this toy." The laughter died. The guests exchanged awkward glances. Margaret rushed to smooth things over with a brittle smile, but the damage had been done. William stood frozen, the shiny keys still warm in his palm, feeling a sharp crack run through the image of his perfect little girl. And in that moment, a thought he had never dared to entertain crept into his mind. Had he raised a monster? The night after the disastrous party, William sat alone in his dimly lit study. The walls, lined with books he had never quite found time to read, seemed to close in on him. The clock above the fireplace ticked loudly, each second a cruel reminder of how far things had slipped from his control. Margaret had gone to bed early, claiming a headache. Emily, after sulking most of the evening, had stormed off with her friends to some after-party. William did not know where she was, and for the first time, he realized he did not know her at all. He poured himself a glass of scotch and stared out at the blackened London skyline. The city seemed so vast, so indifferent, just like his daughter. Suddenly, a soft tapping came at the door. William turned, startled. He had told the staff to leave him alone tonight. The door creaked open, revealing Mrs. Pembroke, their elderly housekeeper. Her face was pale, her hands trembling slightly. "Sir," she whispered, "there is something you should see." William frowned but followed her down the hallway. She led him to Emily's room, where the door stood ajar. Inside, the golden glow of fairy lights illuminated walls plastered with glossy photographs. Not of family or friends, but of luxury goods. Designer handbags, private jets, sprawling mansions. And then he noticed the notes. Pages torn from magazines, scribbled with frantic handwriting. "I deserve better. I am owed this. They will pay." Mrs. Pembroke hesitated, then handed him Emily's diary. William opened it, his hand shaking. The entries were a cold revelation. Emily viewed her parents not as loving protectors, but as obstacles. She resented them for not giving her everything she demanded, saw their affection as a form of control. A coldness gripped William's heart. Somewhere along the way, in their desperate attempts to shield her from pain, they had created something hollow and sharp. The study door creaked again behind him. William turned, expecting Mrs. Pembroke. But it was Emily, standing in the shadows, her face unreadable. "Looking through my things, father?" she said, her voice silky and dangerous. William struggled to find his voice, the diary slipping from his fingers and landing on the floor with a dull thud. For the first time in his life, he was afraid of his own daughter. The next morning, the Harroways sat around the grand breakfast table in stiff, uncomfortable silence. The clinking of silverware against porcelain was the only sound filling the cavernous dining room. William tried to catch Emily's eye, but she busied herself scrolling through her phone, her face a perfect mask of indifference. Margaret, sensing the tension but choosing to ignore it, chatted about the weather and an upcoming charity gala, her voice unnaturally bright. Inside, William's mind churned. He replayed the previous night over and over, the hateful words written in Emily's diary burning into his memory. Had it all really gone so wrong? Had they failed her so utterly? When Margaret finally left to prepare for her luncheon, William seized his chance. "Emily," he said, voice low, "we need to talk." She didn't look up. "If it's about last night, don't bother. You've made it perfectly clear what you think of me." William's fists clenched under the table. "No, you made it clear what you think of us." Emily shrugged lazily, still refusing to meet his gaze. "Maybe you should have listened sooner." A sharp, cold fury rose in William's chest. "I will not tolerate this behavior in my house." At that, Emily finally looked up, a mocking smile tugging at her lips. "Your house," she said sweetly. "You think any of this will still be yours when I'm through?" William stared at her, stunned. The words didn't even sound like Emily anymore. They sounded like someone who had been planning something far more malicious than simple rebellion. Before he could reply, Emily rose, smoothing down her designer jacket. "Don't worry, father," she said lightly. "Soon enough, you won't have to deal with me at all." She breezed out of the room, leaving the air crackling with unspoken threats. William sat there for a long moment, the silence around him growing heavier with each passing second. For the first time, he realized this wasn't just about a spoiled child throwing tantrums. This was about something deeper, something darker. Something he might already be too late to stop. The sky above Hertfordshire grew heavy with thick, churning clouds as the day wore on. An oppressive stillness hung in the air, mirroring the turmoil brewing within the Haraway home. William spent the afternoon buried in his study, rifling through old documents, legal papers, and family trusts. If Emily intended to tear apart everything they had built, he needed to understand how she could possibly do it. He found nothing. At least, nothing obvious. But the thought gnawed at him. She had spoken with such confidence. What did she know that he did not? Meanwhile, Emily retreated to the east wing of the estate, a section practically abandoned after Arthur left for university. There, she surrounded herself with new friends William barely recognized, strangers with sly smiles and dark eyes. Margaret tried to maintain appearances, hosting tea parties and charity meetings in the drawing room, but behind the scenes, the cracks widened. The servants whispered among themselves. Neighbors who once envied the Haraways now crossed the street to avoid them. Late that evening, William wandered the corridors, unable to sleep. The grand house, once filled with music and laughter, now echoed with a strange, hollow emptiness. He paused outside Arthur's old bedroom. A sliver of light spilled from under the door. Curious, he pushed it open. Inside, Emily stood by Arthur's desk, rifling through drawers and boxes. At her feet lay a mess of old letters, journals, and dusty photo albums. When she heard him, she froze, then turned, her expression hardening into one of cold defiance. "What are you doing?" William asked sharply. Emily tilted her head slightly, studying him with an unnerving calmness. "Finding what belongs to me," she said. William stepped further into the room, heart pounding. "None of this belongs to you, Emily. This is your brother's." A slow smile spread across her face. "Not anymore." Without another word, she scooped up a handful of papers and brushed past him, disappearing down the hallway. William stared after her, a sinking feeling twisting in his gut. Emily wasn't just lashing out. She was searching for something. And whatever it was, it could be the key to their family's downfall. The next morning, the house was strangely quiet. Even the usual clinking of breakfast plates and soft murmurs of the servants seemed muted, as if the entire estate was holding its breath. William sat alone at the massive dining table, staring into his untouched coffee. Margaret had retreated to her room with a headache, and Emily was nowhere to be seen. Unable to shake the events of the previous night, William decided to investigate. If Emily was searching for something, perhaps he could find it first. He climbed the narrow staircase to the attic, a place rarely visited except during Christmas, when the old decorations were brought down. The air grew colder and dustier as he ascended. The wooden door creaked loudly as he pushed it open. Inside, the attic was a maze of forgotten relics, broken furniture, trunks, portraits shrouded in white cloths. Carefully, he began to search. Hours passed. Just when he was about to give up, William noticed a small chest tucked beneath a moth-eaten quilt. It was locked, but the wood was so old that it splintered easily under pressure. Inside were dozens of letters, tied together with a faded blue ribbon. William picked up the topmost bundle and began to read. The handwriting was familiar. It belonged to his late father, Edward Haraway. The letters spoke of a secret deal made decades ago, one that protected the family's fortune at the cost of loyalty to certain powerful figures. Worse yet, there was mention of an illegitimate heir, a child born out of wedlock, whose existence had been carefully hidden to protect the Haraway name. William's hands trembled. Could it be that Emily had discovered these letters? Was she using this knowledge to claim what she believed was her rightful place? A sudden noise startled him. Footsteps on the stairs. Quickly, William shoved the letters back into the chest and pulled a dusty tarp over it just as Emily appeared in the doorway. Her eyes narrowed. "You shouldn't be here," she said coolly. "And you shouldn't be digging through the past," William replied, trying to keep his voice steady. Emily smiled faintly, a knowing, dangerous smile. "Some things," she said, "cannot stay buried forever." Without another word, she turned and disappeared down the stairs, leaving William standing there, heart pounding and mind reeling. The Haraway legacy was more fragile than he had ever imagined. And now, it seemed, Emily held all the pieces. The following days were tense within Haraway Manor. Whispers traveled faster than the autumn wind, and though no one spoke openly, William could feel the walls closing in. One evening, desperate for answers, William slipped away from the house and made his way to the woods that bordered the estate. The woods had always been a place of mystery, where the villagers spoke of ancient spirits and lost travelers. As he wandered deeper, the trees thickened, blocking out the pale moonlight. An eerie silence surrounded him, broken only by the crunch of his boots on the fallen leaves. He reached a clearing where an old stone well stood, forgotten and covered in ivy. There, waiting for him, was Mrs. Winfield, the housekeeper, wrapped tightly in a thick shawl. "I thought you might come," she said in a low voice. William frowned. "You know something, don't you?" he demanded. Mrs. Winfield glanced nervously around before speaking. "Your father, he made enemies. Powerful ones. He promised to hide the child, to raise it elsewhere. But something went wrong." William's heart thudded painfully in his chest. "Is Emily the child?" he asked. Mrs. Winfield hesitated, then shook her head slowly.
"No."
"Not Emily." William's mind raced. If not Emily, then who? Mrs. Winfield stepped closer, her voice barely a whisper. It was Margaret. The world seemed to tilt. Margaret, his cousin, the one who had grown up with him under the same roof. She was the illegitimate heir? "She was brought here as a baby," Mrs. Winfield continued. "Given the Haraway name. Your father thought it safer that way. But some knew the truth. And someone told Emily." William staggered back a step, trying to process the revelation. Margaret was family, but not in the way he had believed. Suddenly, a branch snapped behind them. They turned sharply. Through the trees, a figure darted away, quick as a shadow. Someone had been listening. Without hesitation, William chased after the figure, his breath ragged, heart hammering. The woods seemed alive, branches grabbing at his clothes, roots trying to trip him. He caught a glimpse of the figure's coat, dark, flowing, before it vanished behind a twisted oak. When William reached the spot, there was nothing. Just the whisper of the wind, and a scrap of fabric caught on a branch, dark velvet, unmistakably from Emily's coat. William clenched the fabric in his fist. Emily knew everything now, and whatever plans she had, he was running out of time to stop her. Back at Haraway Manor, William knew he had to act quickly. He slipped in through the kitchen door, careful not to wake anyone. The house was silent except for the creaking of the old wood under his feet. He moved with purpose, heading towards the cellar, a place where his father had often forbidden him to go. The key hung behind a loose brick in the pantry, just as Mrs. Winfield had once whispered to him when he was a boy. With trembling hands, he retrieved it and made his way to the heavy cellar door. The lock clicked open with a reluctant groan. A wave of cold, musty air rolled out, carrying the scent of damp earth and something else, something metallic. Torch in hand, William descended the narrow stone steps. The cellar was larger than he remembered, stretching out like a labyrinth. His light caught the glint of old wine bottles, dusty furniture, and crates nailed shut. But at the far end, something new stood out, a wooden chest, ancient and bound with iron. William approached it cautiously. The chest bore the Haraway crest, worn and almost invisible. He lifted the heavy lid. Inside, wrapped in faded velvet, were papers, letters, birth certificates, and a leather-bound journal. William pulled out the journal, its pages brittle with age. He flipped through until he found a passage marked with a torn ribbon. It was his father's handwriting. "If anyone finds this, know that I did what I must to protect the bloodline. Margaret is the true heir, born of a forbidden love. If the truth is uncovered, the consequences will be dire." William's head spun. His entire life had been built on a lie, carefully woven by the man he once admired most. He barely had time to process it before he heard footsteps above. Not just one set, several. Voices, low and hurried, echoed through the house. William snapped the journal shut and tucked it under his coat. Someone was coming. He doused the torch and slipped into the darkest corner of the cellar. The heavy door creaked open and light spilled down the stairs. Silhouetted against it was Emily, flanked by two men he did not recognize. William held his breath as they descended, their conversation carrying in the cold air. "We find the documents, we end this," Emily hissed. "They're not leaving this house alive." William's blood ran cold. Emily was no longer just a threat. She was ready to destroy everything, including him. And unless he found a way out, he would not see another sunrise. William clutched the journal tightly to his chest as Emily and the two men moved deeper into the cellar. Every step they took brought them closer. He scanned the darkness around him, desperate for an escape route. There, a narrow tunnel half hidden behind a stack of old crates. Without a sound, William slipped towards it, his heart pounding against his ribs. The tunnel was barely wide enough for him to squeeze through. Behind him, he heard Emily bark out orders. "Search every inch. He's here. I can feel it." William crawled forward, the damp walls scraping against his coat. The tunnel twisted and turned, leading him further away from the cellar. He had no idea where it ended, but staying was not an option. At last, the tunnel opened up into a forgotten servant's passageway, dusty and unused. He scrambled to his feet and ran. Above him, the house stirred, doors slamming, footsteps racing. William burst into the kitchen, just as heavy boots thundered down the main stairs. He darted towards the garden door, only to find it bolted shut. Panic surged through him. He fumbled with the locks, every second feeling like an eternity. At last, the door gave way, and he stumbled into the freezing night. The grounds of Haraway Manor stretched out before him, wide and open. No cover, no shadows to hide in. He sprinted towards the old stables, praying they were empty. A gunshot rang out behind him, and he dropped low, heart hammering wildly. He dared not look back. He reached the stables and threw himself inside, slamming the door. Breathless, he scanned the gloom. Rusty tools, rotting hay, and in the corner, an old motorcycle covered with a sheet. William tore the cover away. Miraculously, the bike seemed intact. The keys dangled from a hook nearby. He grabbed them, jammed one into the ignition, and prayed. The engine coughed, sputtered, then roared to life. Another gunshot shattered the night, and William knew he had no time left. He revved the engine and tore out of the stables, mud flying behind him. Behind him, Emily's furious scream echoed into the darkness. William didn't look back. He rode hard and fast, the cold wind slashing his face. He had the truth clutched against his heart, and an entire history of betrayal chasing after him. And somewhere ahead, Margaret was waiting. The answers they both needed were no longer buried in the past. They were alive. And dangerous. The old motorcycle rattled and wheezed as William sped across the open moors. The night stretched endlessly around him, the sky heavy with clouds. He had no idea where the narrow track he followed would lead, but instinct urged him forward. The wind howled in his ears, carrying with it the distant tolling of a bell. Somewhere, a village slept unaware of the danger tearing through their countryside. William glanced back once. The lights of Haraway Manor had disappeared, swallowed by the hills.
He was alone now.
Or so he thought. A sudden flash of headlights blazed behind him, and his heart plummeted. Someone was following. He gritted his teeth and twisted the throttle, forcing the old bike to its limit. The engine groaned, but held. The headlights grew closer, bouncing over the rough terrain. William veered off the track, plunging into the wild grasslands. The bike jostled violently beneath him, but he clung on, navigating by the faint outlines of ancient stone walls and forgotten trees. A shot rang out, slicing through the night. William ducked instinctively. The bullet missed, but the message was clear. They meant to kill him. Another shot. Closer. He pushed the bike harder, heart pounding in his throat. Through the mist ahead, he saw the ruins of an old chapel rising from the moor like a ghost. With no other choice, he steered towards it. He reached the crumbling stone wall just as the bike's engine coughed and died.
Dead.
He abandoned the machine, vaulting over the low wall and sprinting for cover. The chapel loomed before him, broken and hollow. He darted inside, pressing his back against the cold stone. Breath ragged, ears straining, he waited. Footsteps crunched on the gravel outside. William tightened his grip on the journal. He could hear voices now, muffled, angry. They can't have gone far. Search everywhere. He crept deeper into the ruins, heart hammering. At the far end, a narrow staircase spiraled downward, half hidden by debris. Without thinking, William plunged into the darkness below, the scent of earth and decay surrounding him. He stumbled down the steps, gripping the walls to steady himself. At the bottom, he found a small crypt, cold and silent. He crouched behind a fallen statue just as the pursuers entered the chapel above. The journal pulsed in his hand, as if alive. He knew now that it was more than just a record of the past.
It was the key.
And everyone wanted it. The chase was no longer about secrets. It was about survival. The crypt was damp and freezing, each breath William took curling into mist. Above, faint echoes of boots scraping stone reached his ears, but the walls down here were thick.
For now, he was hidden.
His fingers brushed the cracked tiles beneath him and found something unexpected, a metal ring, embedded into the floor. With a grunt he pulled. A square slab of stone shifted, revealing a narrow tunnel descending deeper into darkness. Without hesitation, William squeezed through, dragging the journal with him. The air grew colder as he crawled forward, the tunnel tightening around him. After what felt like hours, he tumbled out into a vast underground chamber. Torch brackets lined the walls, and to his amazement, several were still lit, their flames flickering weakly. The chamber was ancient, its ceiling lost in shadow, and at its center stood a stone pedestal. On it, an open book, identical to the journal he carried. William approached, heart hammering. Symbols swirled across the pages, glowing faintly. He opened the journal from Haraway Manor. The symbols matched exactly. As he turned the pages, the air vibrated, as if the chamber itself recognized the manuscript. Suddenly, a low rumble shook the ground. A door hidden in the stone wall creaked open. Footsteps. William barely had time to duck behind a pillar as two figures entered. One was Charles Haraway, face grim and furious. The other, To William's shock, was Inspector Wallace, the man who had sworn to protect him. Betrayal twisted in William's gut. "This is it," Wallace muttered, approaching the pedestal. "With this, the world will bow to the Harroways again." Charles sneered. "The boy must have it. Find him." William's mind raced. He had moments, maybe less, before they found him. He clutched the journal tighter. He could destroy it.
He could run.
Or he could do what he knew was right. Carefully, silently, he stepped from behind the pillar. "Looking for this?" he called out, raising the journal high. Both men spun towards him, rage and desperation flashing across their faces. William backed towards the pedestal. "You'll never understand it," he said. "It wasn't meant for people like you." Wallace lunged forward, gun drawn. William slammed the journal onto the pedestal. A blinding light erupted, filling the chamber. The ground shook violently, and the walls began to crack. William felt himself lifted, carried by a force beyond anything he had ever known. The screams of Harroway and Wallace were swallowed by the roar of the collapsing chamber. Then silence. When William opened his eyes, he was lying on the moors beneath a silver dawn. The ruins of the old chapel smoldered in the distance. The journal was gone, but in its place, something new stirred within him, a knowledge, ancient and pure, that no one could ever corrupt again. He stood, battered but alive, and walked towards the rising sun. The past was finally buried, and so was its curse.